The street was quiet that Saturday morning, except for the sound of sprinklers ticking rhythmically across manicured lawns. In Willow Creek Estates, every bush was trimmed, every driveway spotless, and every front porch carried the silent signature of conformity. The residents liked it that way, or rather, the homeowners association demanded it. And nobody enforced those rules harder than Karen Whitfield. Karen was in her late 50s, with sharp eyes behind designer glasses and a voice that could slice through brick. To her, every house, every blade of grass, and every human being in the neighborhood had to meet her standards, or pay the price. She had driven people to tears with fines for leaving garbage cans out too long, and once even threatened to sue a single mom for having a swing set in her backyard. She was ruthless, proud of it, and untouchable. Or so she thought. That morning, Karen stood on the sidewalk in front of a newly painted, two-story house at the end of the cul-de-sac. The home had recently sold, and a moving truck was still parked along the curb. Karen had already been frowning for the past 20 minutes. The new owner hadn't introduced themselves. Worse, she had caught sight of a black woman carrying boxes into the house. To Karen, that was enough to trigger every ugly thought she had kept simmering behind her carefully polite smile. "Excuse me," Karen called out, marching up the driveway with her clipboard in hand. The woman turned. She was tall, poised, and in her early 40s. She wore a plain t-shirt and jeans, her hair tied back neatly. Her expression was calm, but her eyes had a depth that made Karen hesitate for half a second. "Yes," the woman said evenly. "You can't just move in without proper clearance," Karen snapped. "This is Willow Creek Estates. We have rules, and strangers don't just show up here." The woman raised a brow. "Strangers," she repeated softly. Karen nodded firmly, as if her word were law. "Yes. I don't know who you are, and I don't recall the HOA approving your residency. In fact," she glanced theatrically at her clipboard. "There's no record of a sale to you. I'm afraid you'll have to leave until this is sorted out." The woman studied her silently for a moment, as though she were weighing something. Then, with the faintest smile tugging at her lips, she replied, "My name is Dr. Maya Thompson. And I think you'll find that I don't need your approval to live in my own house." Karen's face turned red. "Your house? That's not possible. You couldn't possibly." But before she could finish, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. A man in a suit stepped out, carrying a stack of documents. He walked directly past Karen and handed them to Maya. "Here are the rest of the title transfers, Dr. Thompson," he said respectfully. "And congratulations again on acquiring the Willow Creek properties." Karen blinked. "Properties?" she stammered. Maya's eyes never left Karen's. She opened the folder slowly, letting the papers catch the light of the morning sun. There it was, page after page of signed deeds and ownership records. Not just for the house she stood in, but for nearly every home in the neighborhood. Karen felt her throat go dry. That can't be," she whispered. But Maya only smiled, her voice calm and measured. "You were right about one thing, Mrs. Whitfield. Strangers don't just show up here. Owners do." For the first time in years, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA found herself speechless. And for the first time in her life, Karen realized, this neighborhood no longer belonged to her. For the rest of that morning, Karen paced her kitchen like a caged animal. Her hands trembled as she poured herself a third cup of coffee, spilling some onto the counter. She couldn't stop replaying the words in her head, "Owners do." How could it be possible? How could this woman, this outsider, own property in her neighborhood? Karen had built her identity around control, around the rules of Willow Creek Estates. The HOA wasn't just an association to her, it was her throne. And if Maya Thompson really owned multiple homes here, then everything Karen ruled over could crumble in an instant. Karen dialed the number of her closest ally, Marcia, another board member. Within minutes, Marcia arrived, still in her yoga clothes, clutching a water bottle. "What's going on, Karen?" Marcia asked, stepping inside. "You sounded frantic." Karen closed the blinds dramatically, then leaned in close. "The new neighbor, she claims she owns half the neighborhood." Marcia frowned. "What do you mean claims?" Karen's voice sharpened. "Some lawyer handed her documents, deeds, titles, like she bought them up. But that's impossible. How could someone like her?" Karen bit her tongue, catching herself before the thought slipped out. Marcia tilted her head. "Like her?" Karen waved a dismissive hand. "You know what I mean. She's not one of us." But even as she said it, Karen realized the weight of those words. Marcia's expression tightened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she said, "Well, if it's true, then she's a threat. We'll have to push back." Karen seized on the idea like a lifeline. "Exactly. She thinks she can stroll in here and take over. Not a chance. We'll use the bylaws. Technicalities. Fines. If she doesn't bend, we'll break her." What Karen didn't know was that across the street, behind her drawn blinds, several neighbors had already noticed the scene that morning. And whispers were spreading. By evening, Maya sat on her porch with a glass of iced tea, the soft hum of crickets surrounding her. She wore a quiet smile as she looked out over the cul-de-sac. To her, it wasn't just a house, it was history. Her grandfather, James Thompson, had once worked this very land when it was little more than farmland owned by a wealthy developer. Back then, black families weren't welcome here. They were laborers, janitors, invisible. But James had dreamed of more. Over the decades, he saved, invested, and finally bought small parcels of property around town. That legacy had passed to Maya's father, and then to her. While Karen was writing rules about mailbox colors, Maya had been in courtrooms, negotiating acquisitions, quietly buying properties that others overlooked. And when the chance came to acquire foreclosed homes in Willow Creek during the housing crash, Maya hadn't hesitated. She had bought them silently, through trusts and shell companies. Now, years later, the neighborhood had blossomed, prices had soared, and Maya was no longer just a property owner. She was the majority landholder. A knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find a young couple, Ben and Alicia, standing nervously with a plate of cookies. "Hi," Alicia said with a small smile. "We saw what happened this morning. We just wanted to say, welcome. And, thank you." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Thank you." Ben shifted awkwardly. "Look, Karen, she's been making our lives miserable for years. Fines for tiny things, threatening letters. Most of us are too afraid to push back. But if you really own what you say you own, then maybe things can finally change." Maya studied them for a long moment before her smile softened. "Well, change doesn't happen overnight. But I didn't come here to make enemies. I came here to remind people that no one should feel small in their own home." The couple left, a glimmer of hope in their eyes. But across the cul-de-sac, Karen sat in her living room, staring through a narrow slit in her blinds. She had seen the exchange. She had seen the way Maya's presence was already shifting the balance of power. And as the night deepened, Karen whispered to herself like a vow. She has no idea who she's dealing with. What Karen didn't know, what she couldn't even imagine, was that Maya had been preparing for this confrontation her entire life. By Monday morning, Karen had called an emergency meeting of the HOA board. It wasn't unusual, she thrived on these little displays of authority. But this meeting felt different. Her voice carried more urgency, her eyes sharper than usual as she addressed the 3 other board members gathered around the long oak table in the community clubhouse. "She's a problem," Karen declared, slamming her palm against a stack of papers. "This. Maya Thompson thinks she can just march in and take over. Not on my watch." The others exchanged wary glances. Marcia, still Karen's loyal shadow, nodded vigorously. But the two men, Steve, a quiet accountant, and George, a retired teacher, looked less convinced. Karen, George said carefully, if she does own those properties, legally, she has rights. More rights than us, actually. The HOA can't override property ownership. Karen's eyes narrowed. That's where you're wrong. We have bylaws. Regulations. Technicalities. Nobody is above the HOA. Marcia chimed in quickly, we could fine her for violations. Her moving truck stayed overnight, that's against Section 12. Her paint color hasn't been pre-approved. And did you see those curtains? Not within the community palette. Karen's lips curled into a satisfied smile. Exactly. We'll drown her in notices and fees. By the time we're done, she'll either sell or surrender. But Steve spoke up quietly. Karen, what if she doesn't? What if she fights back? Karen leaned forward, her voice dropping into a hiss. Then she'll regret ever setting foot in Willow Creek. That evening, Maya returned home to find a bright yellow notice taped to her door. Violation of HOA Code 12B, unauthorized paint color. Another on her mailbox. Violation of HOA Code 7A, improper parking. And another slipped under her mat. Violation of HOA Code 15C, unapproved window treatments. She gathered the stack of papers, flipping through them with calm, steady hands. By the time she reached the last one, a faint chuckle escaped her lips. The next morning, instead of removing the notices, Maya taped them all to her garage door for the entire neighborhood to see. Neighbors walking their dogs paused, reading them. Some whispered. Some laughed. And for the first time in years, the HOA's power looked more like a tantrum than authority. Karen nearly choked on her coffee when she saw it. By Wednesday, the board sent Maya an official summons, a hearing at the clubhouse to determine the extent of her violations. They expected her to crumble under pressure. But when Maya walked in that evening, she wasn't alone. A dozen neighbors followed her, quietly taking seats in the back. Ben and Alicia. An elderly man named Mr. Rivera who'd been fined 3 times for planting roses. A single mom, Denise, who'd been shamed for leaving her kids' bikes outside. One by one, the people Karen had bullied now showed up, not for spectacle, but for solidarity. Karen's eyes darted nervously across the room. This is a private board matter, she snapped. Maya's voice was calm, but carried across the hall. As majority landholder in Willow Creek Estates, I believe this is everyone's matter. After all, your decisions affect every homeowner here, don't they? The board shuffled uncomfortably. George cleared his throat, but Karen cut him off. You're here because you broke the rules, she barked. Unauthorized paint. Parking violations. Non-conforming curtains. You may own property, but ownership doesn't exempt you from order. Maya tilted her head, her smile cool and composed. And yet. I reviewed the HOA bylaws myself last night. Fascinating reading. Did you know that Section 12, the one about parking, was repealed 3 years ago when the county updated zoning codes? Karen froze. And Section 15? Maya continued smoothly. The one about curtains? No longer enforceable since the Fair Housing Act Amendment of 2015. Discrimination on aesthetic grounds is quite illegal. Gasps rippled through the room. Steve paled, realizing she was right. George shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Maya stepped closer, laying a neatly bound folder on the table. I've taken the liberty of highlighting every clause in your bylaws that no longer holds legal standing. More than half of them, as it turns out. Which means every fine you've issued, every threat you've made, could be challenged in court. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. And, Maya added, her voice soft but firm, as the largest property owner here, I have the legal standing to call for a vote to dissolve this HOA entirely. The room erupted in murmurs. Neighbors leaned forward, whispering to one another, their eyes wide. For the first time, they saw light at the end of their long tunnel of fines and threats. Karen slammed her fist on the table. You wouldn't dare. But Maya simply smiled, her calm demeanor unshaken. Try me. At that moment, the power Karen had wielded for years cracked like glass underfoot. And the neighborhood, once held in fear, began to imagine a world without her. Karen barely slept that night. Her mind spun with fragments of bylaws, angry mutters, and the sight of neighbors clapping quietly for Maya. She had never seen them look so alive, so free. It made her stomach twist. By dawn, she had already typed a furious email to the board. We cannot let this woman dismantle everything we've built. If she takes control, Willow Creek will descend into chaos, untrimmed lawns, noisy parties, renters. Our property values will plummet. We must act, and fast. Her desperation showed. The email ended with a line she hadn't meant to type but did anyway, people like her don't belong in places like this. She hit send before she realized what she had done. That afternoon, Karen called the county office, demanding an inspection on Maya's home. She claimed zoning violations, safety hazards, even an unlicensed renovation. The inspector, weary of her frequent complaints, promised to look into it. Next, she hired a lawyer. A sharp, ruthless man in a pinstripe suit who promised her that if there was any weakness in Maya's ownership paperwork, he would find it. Karen clung to that promise like a drowning woman to driftwood. Meanwhile, Maya went about her days with calm precision. She invited neighbors over for coffee, listened to their stories, took notes about their struggles with the HOA. She didn't speak about revenge. She spoke about freedom. About dignity. About the simple right to live without fear of harassment in your own home. Slowly, the neighborhood shifted. Lawn chairs appeared on front porches again. Kids' bikes leaned casually against fences without being snatched away. People smiled when they walked their dogs, no longer afraid of Karen's clipboard emerging from the shadows. It terrified Karen. By Thursday evening, she stormed into Maya's yard uninvited, clutching a thick envelope. Here, she snapped, thrusting it forward. Cease and desist. You can't threaten the HOA. You can't intimidate me. My lawyer says you've overstepped. Maya didn't even stand. She sat on her porch swing, rocking gently, a book in her lap. She looked up slowly, her eyes calm. Cease and desist what, exactly? Karen's voice cracked with rage. Everything. Owning half the neighborhood doesn't give you the right to destroy it. Maya closed her book softly. Destroy it? Or free it? Neighbors peeked through windows, some even stepping outside to watch. Karen didn't notice. Her face burned crimson. You think you can waltz in here and take my power, she spat. You don't belong here. This is my community, not yours. You're nothing but. She stopped, but it was too late. Everyone had heard the venom in her voice. The word she hadn't said aloud hung heavy in the humid evening air. Maya rose slowly, stepping down from the porch. She stood inches from Karen, her presence towering though her voice was calm. Mrs. Whitfield, I don't need to take your power. You've given it away, every time you used it to belittle, to bully, to exclude. A community built on fear isn't a community at all. It's a cage. Karen trembled, but her rage drowned her reason. She thrust the envelope against Maya's chest. You'll regret this. I'll ruin you. Maya gently pushed the papers back into Karen's hands. No, Karen. You're ruining yourself. The next morning, the lawyer Karen had hired called with grim news. Your bylaws won't hold in court. Thompson's ownership is airtight. Anne, he hesitated. That email you sent to your board members, it's now in Maya's possession. Legally, it can be considered evidence of discriminatory intent. If she sues, you'll lose everything. Karen's blood ran cold. That evening, she drove through the neighborhood, desperate for support. But doors didn't open when she knocked. Curtains twitched, but no one came out. The people she had ruled for years were gone, not literally, but in spirit. They had already shifted to Maya's side. For the first time in her reign, Karen felt it, she was alone. The Queen of Willow Creek had lost her crown, and everyone knew it. And as she drove past Maya's house, she saw neighbors gathered on the lawn, laughing, sharing food, children playing freely under the porch light. Maya stood at the center, not ruling them, but simply belonging. Karen's hands clenched the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. She whispered to herself, broken and bitter, this isn't over. It can't be. But deep down, she knew, it already was. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. For years, the second Saturday of every month had been HOA inspection day. Karen would march up and down the cul-de-sac with her clipboard, her shadow stretching long across the manicured lawns, leaving behind a trail of yellow violation slips. But this Saturday, the clubhouse parking lot was full for a different reason. A neighborhood meeting had been called, not by Karen, but by Maya. Inside, folding chairs filled the hall. Neighbors who hadn't bothered attending meetings in years now crowded together, their voices buzzing with cautious excitement. For the first time, people were smiling, greeting each other warmly. It felt less like a tribunal and more like a gathering of old friends. Karen sat at the front, stiff and furious, clutching her clipboard like a shield. She whispered to Marcia, but even Marcia's loyalty seemed to falter, her eyes darted toward Maya, unsure. At precisely 10 o'clock, Maya walked to the front of the room. She wore a simple navy dress, her posture calm but commanding. She didn't need to raise her voice, when she spoke, the room quieted. "Good morning," Maya began. "I called this meeting not as an outsider, but as a neighbor. As someone who believes this community deserves better. For too long, fear has ruled here, fear of fines, fear of harassment, fear of never being enough. But homes aren't cages. They should be places of peace, of family, of belonging." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen shot to her feet. "This is outrageous. You don't have the authority." Maya held up a folder, her calmness cutting sharper than anger ever could. "As majority property owner, I do. And today, I'm asking for a vote. Not to destroy Willow Creek, but to rebuild it. To dissolve this HOA and replace it with a neighborhood council. A council run by all of us, not just a handful of people." The room erupted in applause. Karen's face flushed red. She slammed her clipboard on the table. "You fools. Don't you see? Without the HOA, everything will collapse. Your lawns will grow wild, your homes will lose value, your streets will fall apart." An elderly man, Mr. Rivera, rose slowly from the back. His voice was shaky but strong. "No, Karen. Without the HOA, we'll finally breathe. I've lived here 20 years. And I can tell you, our homes lost value the moment we lost our freedom." Loud applause filled the room. Karen tried to speak again, but her words were drowned out. The neighbors, once silent under her rule, were finding their voices. The vote was called. One by one, hands went up. First Ben and Alicia. Then Denise. Then nearly every person in the hall. The decision was overwhelming, the HOA was dissolved. Karen's world shattered. She staggered backward, clutching her chest as if the air had been ripped from her. Her clipboard slipped from her grasp, hitting the floor with a hollow clatter. "You can't do this," she cried, but no one was listening anymore. The power she had clung to for years was gone, slipping through her fingers like sand. Maya stepped forward, her voice gentle yet firm. "Karen, this neighborhood isn't yours to rule. It never was. It belongs to the people who live here. To the families who raise children here. To the elders who grow old here. It belongs to all of us. Karen's lips trembled, but no words came. She turned and fled the clubhouse, the door slamming behind her. For the first time, she didn't leave behind silence. She left behind laughter, relief, and hope. That evening, the cul-de-sac glowed with life. Neighbors gathered outdoors, sharing food, playing music, letting children ride bikes past dark without fear of fines. Porch lights twinkled like stars. Maya stood quietly at the edge, watching. She didn't need a crown or a title. She had something better, the respect and trust of people who now saw her not as a stranger, but as the heart of their community. For Karen, the queen of control, the neighborhood had slipped away. But for Maya, the rightful owner, something more powerful had been won, not just land, not just houses, but the soul of Willow Creek. And under the night sky, filled with laughter and freedom, the neighborhood finally felt like home.